For MFA Incorporated, I'm Tom Stever from Brownfield Ag News, speaking with Product Manager Allen Huhn in the MFA Farm Supply Division. We're talking about putting up hay and preserving it for the greatest productivity. Allen, what are some of the problems that producers are running into in putting up hay?
There's been a couple of things that's come up so far. We've been from feast of rain to famine of the drought in some areas of the state right now. One of the things that I can think of as far as helping with that would be tarping of the hay and getting the hay to be in better quality for our cows. It kind of works into the drought areas too, that with being a drought, there's less hay production, so we need to try to keep all the hay that we can for availability for our livestock.
Allen, you mentioned the 20% rule in haying. Expand on that.
The 20% rule is a pretty good rule of thumb to use. The 20% rule is a common loss due to rot or spoilage on the round bales if they're stored outside. With that 20% loss, it means you're required to feed 20% more hay to your livestock in the wintertime. And not only that, it takes 20% more fuel and time of yours in the summer to produce more hay, and it takes 20% more storage space and 20% more labor to bale and transport the hay to get it not only to the pens and to your stacks, but also 20% more time to feed in the wintertime.
Some of this can be avoided simply by making sure that hay is covered. What's your recommendation?
I recommend two different things you can use to cover hay. One thing is if you build a building, you can do that, put in a shed. But an economical way to store it is with a hay tarp. The proper way to install a hay tarp is to make sure it's on a level ground that has good drainage. And also, whenever you're sizing your hay tarp, you don't want the hay tarp to be all the way down to the ground because you cannot effectively tie it to the bales or to the ropes that are underneath the bales. To figure the proper fit of a tarp is to make sure that the tarp comes down just where the curvature of that bottom bale is, so that the outside part of that bottom bale actually acts as a rain drip. So when the rain comes down the tarp, it goes straight down to the ground, and then that will allow you enough space to tie the tarp to the bales.
Okay, Allen, what are your recommendations for making sure that the tarp stays on the haystack?
Yes, there's a couple ways you can tie it down. One of the best ways to do it is lay rope on the ground and then stack your bales on there and then tie your tarp to that rope. That way everything acts as a one unit. That way the tarp doesn't move on the bales as much as what it would if you hung tires on there or something. I've seen a lot of instances where people use tires to tie down tarps. What happens then is whenever the wind gets underneath the tarps, it flutters. Well, whenever it flutters the long side down to the ground, that causes the tarp to be loose, and then it acts as a big parachute. And then the tarp can be ruined quite easily. We offer one thing called a super cinch kit, and that is a very easy way to keep the tarp tight with the rope that's laid on the ground. I've used one personally for the last 5 years. Once you put it on, you can go around and recheck it and keep your tarp tight. That is another thing that I see that a lot of people don't do, is go back and check the tarps for the tightness. As one company says, a tight tarp is a happy tarp. One other nice thing about that Super Cinch kit is in the wintertime, whenever you are folding your tarp back in order to feed the hay underneath the tarp, you can actually use your gloves to undo the rope. If you tie the rope the conventional way without the cinch kit, most of the time you'll have to take your gloves off to undo the knots. And with that Super Cinch kit, you can still have your gloves on to undo your tarp.
Talk about the importance of keeping haying equipment in tune.
Keeping hay equipment in tune is very important. MFA offers a full line of disc mower blades and sections and rake teeth in order to help with that. And that would just help to keep being in production as far as keep running without having any downtime, fixing in the field and repairs.
There are many methods for tying hay into a bale. One of them is to tie with twine, but I've heard of different types of twine. What are they, and how do you choose?
Basically, there's 3 different types of twine. There's the sisal twine, there's plastic twine, and there's a newer type solar degradable twine. Sisal twine started at the beginning of baling pretty much. That is basically where I'm going to round bales here. That's where the people put the sisal twine around round bales and they store them and then they feed them. Well, that sisal twine is rotted, is decomposed pretty much by the time they feed them, so they don't have to worry about taking the twine off the bales to feed. The disadvantages of the sisal twine is that if it's left in the field at any period of time, and if a tractor with the single spikes is used to pick it up, you're going to lose a lot of hay because the bottom of that bale is going to fray out because that sisal twine is already decomposed to keep that bale from being tight. The twine's function is just to keep the bale together until the time you feed them. Since the sisal twine has done that, a lot of people have been using poly twine. That is a very good product. I mean, that will stay on the bale forever. The bad thing with that is if you don't take it off the hay bale to feed the cows out in the pasture, it can get wrapped around your tractor wheels, around the axles, and then cause bearings to go out. There's been another product that's come out that kind of fits both needs of this in between the sisal and the poly, and that is a solar degradable twine. Personally, I have used it for the last 10 years, and I get along very well with it. The purpose of it is a poly-type twine that has some UV characteristics in there to allow, with a certain amount of sunlight, it will allow that to start breaking down, to decompose. So if you do not take all the string off the bales whenever you feed, at least it has a chance to degrade so it's not there forever.
I also see some big rounds out in the country that are covered by netting. What is that?
The difference between netting and twine is definitely a cost savings factor as far as the time it takes to wrap the netting around the bale. I've heard some reports of it taking only 5 to 10 seconds to wrap a bale with netting because they only take 2 to 3 revolutions around the bale on the netting, whereas twine, if you space it 3 inches apart, that's a lot of turns that the bale has to take, and that could take upwards to about a minute and a half. So over a period of a day of baling, it would save sometimes upwards to an hour on doing the same amount of hay of either baling with netting, which would save you an hour, versus with twine, which would take you the extra hour to do that.
That's Product Manager Allen Huhn in the MFA Farm Supply Division. For MFA Incorporated, I'm Tom Stever, Brownfield Ag News for America.